Twice 32 minutes to an individual that doesn't give a damn about anybody's time with her.
In the heart of Dothan, Illinois, a political showdown unlike any other was brewing. A confrontation so dramatic it could rival the most scandalous political dramas on television. The usually uneventful tenure of Mayor Tiffany Henyard was about to meet its reckoning, and the residents, long simmering with discontent, were ready to let loose their frustrations. It all unfolded on a Monday night during what was supposed to be a routine village board meeting. Tensions had been mounting for months. Frustrations over unresolved issues, power struggles, and the mayor's growing disconnection from her constituents. But it wasn't until Mayor Henyard's late arrival at the meeting, a seemingly minor issue, that the crowd's simmering anger boiled over. At first, the delay might have seemed trivial, but it quickly became the spark that ignited a firestorm of pent-up resentment. A local resident, stepping up to the microphone, Mayor remarked that perfectly encapsulated the mood of the room. "We just gave up 32 minutes to someone who doesn't care." This statement resonated deeply with the crowd, quickly transforming the air from mild annoyance to full-on outrage. What began as a minor inconvenience quickly escalated into an intense outpouring of frustration. Speaker after speaker, their voices quivering with a mix of sadness, despair, and mounting anger, stood up to express their disillusionment with the mayor's leadership as the night wore on. One phrase echoed louder with each iteration: *Clean House 2025. What had started as vague discontent now transformed into a resounding call for radical change. The residents of Dothan were no longer willing to accept the status quo. They were demanding accountability, and they wanted it now. The shift in the crowd was palpable. People who had once been passive observers of local politics were now actively engaged in the fight for their town's future. The energy in the room surged with urgency as the speakers implored their fellow residents to take responsibility for the future of Dothan. One emotional plea reminded everyone that the power to shape the future lay in their hands. Vote wisely. The speaker urged. That simple yet powerful message resonated deeply, stirring the room into a frenzy of civic activism. The one silent crowd had transformed into a unified force, demanding a leader who would listen to their concerns. By now, it was clear that Mayor Henyard could no longer ignore the rising tide of discontent. Her refusal to engage meaningfully with the issues at hand had created a volatile situation, and the meeting had spiraled beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a routine gathering had evolved into a powerful moment of civic awakening. The room was charged with an unmistakable energy, a shared conviction that the time for change had arrived. But Henyard, ever defiant, refused to back down. As the crowd grew more vocal in their demands for her resignation, the mayor took to the podium with unwavering confidence. Her defiant speech, laced with disdain, did nothing to quell the flames of discontent. Instead, it fanned the fire. "I have the seat now, whether you like it or not," she declared, her words cutting to the tension like a knife. It was a bold proclamation, one that reaffirmed her belief that she had earned her position, regardless of the mounting criticism. This declaration, defiant and provocative, was a challenge to her detractors, signaling her determination to hold on to power at all costs. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood leader, embattled by critics who failed to appreciate her resolve. The way she framed her response to the crowd bore striking similarities to former President Donald Trump's approach, standing firm against public disapproval and positioning herself as a victim of unrelenting criticism. Her remarks, though aimed at defending her leadership, only seemed to deepen the divide between her and the residents. Instead of attempting to quell the mounting frustrations or address the underlying issues, she leaned into her role as the embattled leader, seemingly taking pride in her refusal to bend to the will of the people. She suggested that her steadfastness, in the face of overwhelming opposition, would ultimately lead to a future landslide victory, much like Trump's improbable political triumphs. But for many in the room, this was not a message of strength. It was further evidence of her disregard for concerns of her constituents. Her refusal to engage in meaningful dialogue, to acknowledge the issues that had brought the town to its breaking point, only fueled the flames of discontent. For the residents, it was clear Henyard was more concerned with preserving her authority than she was with actually governing. In some ways, her speech mirrored the tone of her leadership throughout her tenure: dismissive, confrontational, and unyielding. She refused to accept responsibility for the scandals and missteps that had plagued her time in office. Rather than acknowledging her failures and working toward reconciliation, she positioned herself as a figure above reproach, reinforcing the belief that her critics simply didn't understand the gravity of the decisions she had made. As the night wore on, the air in the room grew heavier with frustration. The community's sense of urgency became palpable. This was not just about a single elected official. It was about the future of Dothan itself. Many of the residents, once supporters of Henyard, now saw her behavior as an emblem of everything that had gone wrong. Her refusal to accept responsibility for her actions and engage with the concerns of the people she served became the final straw. What had started as a routine meeting was now a full-fledged movement. The people of Doden were no longer content with sitting idly by as their town deteriorated under the weight of mismanagement. They were ready for change. The energy in the room was no longer about airing grievances. It was about taking action. Henyard supporters, however, saw things differently. For them, her defiance was a sign of strength. They admired her unwillingness to be intimidated by public opinion, interpreting her stance as a symbol of her commitment to her vision for the town. They viewed her as a leader who, like other historical figures who faced fierce opposition, would ultimately be vindicated by her tenacity. Yet, the majority of the room, her tone and behavior only served to confirm what they had long suspected. Mayor Henyard was out of touch with the needs and concerns of Doden's residents. Her leadership, once seen as a beacon of hope, had become an increasingly alienating force. Her supporters may have seen her as a strong, resolute leader, but for the rest of the community, her leadership was increasingly seen as untenable. The night ended with the feeling that a pivotal moment had passed, a turning point for the town of Doden. The political protest that had erupted in that village hall was not just about Mayor Henyard's leadership. It was about the collective realization that power in a democracy belongs to the people. No longer willing to tolerate her dismissive attitude and refusal to acknowledge their concerns, the residents had made their voices heard, and as the meeting drew to a close, one thing became abundantly clear. The momentum for change was unstoppable. The people of Doden were united in their demand for accountability, transparency, and a new era of leadership, whether or not Henyard chose to recognize it. Her time in office was coming to an end. The residents had made it clear that they would not stand for an unresponsive, disconnected leader any longer. And as the clock ticked toward 2025, the words "Clean House 2025" echoed through the chambers, a resounding call for radical change from Mayor Henyard. It was a moment of defiance. For the residents of Doden, it was a moment of hope. And for the town itself, it was a moment of transformation. The battle for the future of Dalton had only just begun.
Without bias, at the conclusion of this investigation, I will provide an assessment of the findings.
In a tense and emotionally charged moment, a courageous resident of Doden stood up to Mayor Tiffany Henyard, delivering a statement that encapsulated the town's long-simmering frustrations with her leadership. "We are citizens, not your subjects or employees," the resident declared firmly, igniting a wave of support from the crowd. "And since you are departed with this resolute statement, you will not treat us this way any longer." The words rang out across the packed room, immediately resonating with the residents who had endured years of Henyard's dismissive leadership. The mayor, known for her frequent disregard of criticism and her air of superiority, tried to maintain her defiant stance. But her words only fueled the fire of discontent. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, rallying behind the courageous speaker. The mayor's typical dismissive attitude had failed to intimidate them. The response from the residents was clear. They would no longer tolerate what they saw as Henyard's arrogance and overreach. This fire exchange was not merely a political dispute. It symbolized the town's collective demand for respect and accountability. The residents' passionate challenge electrified the room, and the applause that followed demonstrated the growing, unified desire for change. This was a pivotal turning point. The residents of Doden made it clear that they would not be silenced or dismissed any longer. They rejected the idea of being passive subjects under an out-of-touch leader. The confrontation represented the rising frustration with a leadership that had grown aloof and indifferent to the needs of the community, revealing the deep divide between Henyard and her constituents as the mayor stubbornly clung to her authority. Her remarks only reinforced the perception of her as a leader disconnected from the town's pressing concerns. The cheers that greeted the residents' challenge were a potent signal of the community's collective will, a reminder that in a democracy, even small-town citizens have the power to speak up and demand change. This wasn't just about protesting policies or decisions. It was about reclaiming the voice and authority of the people. The confrontation also highlighted broader issues within Doden, a town that had grown increasingly disillusioned with its leadership. Henyard's tenure had been marred by accusations of financial mismanagement, dismissive governance, and a growing withdrawal from the community. These issues had been building for months, if not years, and the tension that erupted in this meeting was a result of a deep-seated dissatisfaction with her leadership. The residents seized the opportunity to voice their discontent, not just to air grievances, but to call for an end to broken promises and a government that seemed to have lost touch with the people it was meant to serve. This heated exchange underscored a larger conflict, one of the community coming together to demand a change in leadership, and a leader who would listen and act in the best interest of the town despite Henyard's insistence on holding on to power. Her defiance only emboldened the crowd. The more she clung to her authority, the stronger the resistance became. The crowd's unwavering determination pushed back against her attempts to control the narrative. What had begun as a routine public meeting had transformed into a moment of collective action, an example of how, even in the face of entrenched leadership, the voices of the people could rise up and challenge the status quo. The confrontation in Dodon was a testament to the resilience of grassroots democracy, proving that even in small towns, citizens could hold their leaders accountable and demand a government that truly represented their interests. The impact of this showdown rippled through the town, sending a clear message to Henyard and others in power that the status quo was no longer acceptable. Even as Henyard tried to maintain her defiant stance, her refusal to engage with the community's concerns only amplified the demand for change. The confrontation between Henyard and the citizens of Dodon marked a pivotal moment in the town's struggle for accountability and transparency, reflecting a larger battle between grassroots activism and entrenched political power. Henyard detractors saw her defiant statements as a clear indication of her refusal to take responsibility for her actions, while her supporters viewed her defiance as a symbol of resilience in the face of mounting criticism. The atmosphere in the meeting room was charged with emotion. Dodon citizens, fed up with years of neglect and mismanagement, made it clear that they were no longer willing to be passive observers in their own governance. This confrontation wasn't just about political differences. It was a collective demand for change, a demand to challenge leadership and to hold those in power accountable. As the meeting progressed, it became evident that the town was no longer willing to tolerate the denial and dismissal of their concerned citizens. Rallied behind the idea that they had the right to demand better leadership, challenge authority, and reclaim control over their town's future. The powerful display of unity among the residents was a symbolic moment of empowerment, signaling that Dodon citizens were determined to take charge of their destiny. No longer willing to be silenced or overlook, the impact of this confrontation rippled through the town, sending a clear message to Henyard and others in power that the status quo was no longer acceptable. Even as Henyard tried to maintain her defiant stance, her refusal to engage with the community's concerns only reinforced the growing sense of frustration that had been simmering for years. The confrontation in Dodon was just the beginning of what would become a long-running struggle between Henyard's leadership and the people of Dodon. The situation worsened as Henyard's tenure became increasingly controversial, especially with the town under FBI investigation in the months that followed. By May 2024, administration inquiries into village spending revealed troubling financial patterns. Dodon's general fund balance, which stood at $5.61 million in 2012, had plummeted to just $3.65 million. This revelation exacerbated public dissatisfaction, as residents grew more concerned about the town's future under Henyard's leadership. The mayor's failure to address the growing financial instability deepened the town's crisis. As the investigation into Henyard's financial operations continued, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot became involved, raising serious concerns about the excessive use of town resources and a lack of oversight. Lightfoot's investigation uncovered alarming evidence of mismanagement, including missing receipts and questionable financial practices. Most notably, $43,000 had been spent on Amazon purchases on January 5, 2023, under Henyard's watch. These revelations further fueled the anger of residents who felt betrayed by the mayor's lack of accountability. The growing revelations of fiscal mismanagement created a volatile atmosphere in Dodon, where residents were increasingly disillusioned with the lack of transparency. The mayor's attempts to deflect and downplay the severity of the situation only alienated the public further, and the discontent reached a boiling point. The tension between Henyard and the town's trustees also escalated. The trustees ruled that Henyard's attempt to appoint Ronald Beer as the new police chief without board approval was illegal. This decision sparked further conflict, with the mayor's refusal to work collaboratively with the board adding fuel to the fire. The confrontation between Henyard and the trustees served as yet another reminder of her authoritarian leadership style and her growing detachment from the democratic process. The town of Dodon, once governed by a leader who seemed impervious to criticism, had reached a breaking point. The confrontation at the meeting, fueled by years of frustration, was a spark that ignited a larger movement for change. As more revelations came to light, and as the mayor's mismanagement and indifference became undeniable, the citizens of Dodon grew more united in their demand for accountability. No longer willing to be passive subjects under a disconnected leader, they had made their voices heard, loud and clear. The future of Dodon was now in the hands of its residents, and they were ready to reclaim their town and its future, ensuring that their voices would no longer be ignored. This moment marked the culmination of months of escalating friction between Mayor Tiffany Henyard and the Dalton Board trustees. particularly with trustees Christopher Gonzalez and Carmen Carlisle. Both trustees had become increasingly wary of Henyard's growing concentration of power, and their concerns had reached a boiling point. Carlisle's absence from a key board meeting, which ultimately prevented a vote to choose a new trustee, was seen by many as a strategic move to block Henyard's attempts to push through her agenda. Carlisle and Gonzalez had been vocal in their concerns about Henyard's rush to call meetings and make appointments. They feared that too much power was being concentrated in the hands of the mayor, particularly when it came to financial matters. The trustees were particularly worried about a return to the questionable spending patterns that had plagued the previous administration. Their concerns weren't unfounded. Many residents had grown increasingly disillusioned by the mayor's actions, suspecting that financial mismanagement was once again on the horizon. Further complicating matters was Henyard's controversial decision to appoint Ronald Beer as the new police chief. Beer had a checkered history, having been involved in a controversial bankruptcy fraud case at the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board. More alarmingly, he was found to be lacking the necessary qualifications and documentation required to serve as police chief. In fact, the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board had even recommended that Henyard remove Beer from public service until his eligibility was properly established. The legal battle surrounding Beer's appointment only added to the growing turmoil in Dalton, with residents increasingly questioning the mayor's leadership and ability to address critical issues as the situation in Dalton continued to unravel. Henyard's reelection campaign quickly became one of the most controversial and divisive political stories in the town's history. Driven by ongoing allegations of mismanagement, financial corruption, and increasingly erratic public relations stunts, the controversy surrounding the mayor escalated further when it was revealed that she and her partner had not paid rent since August, accumulating thousands of dollars in back rent and late fees. While Henyard refuted the claims, the legal battle surrounding the eviction case only served to expose the vulnerability of her leadership in an attempt to deflect attention from the issue. Henyard allowed Burge SDR to temporarily act as head of the town for 30 days. However, a judge ultimately reversed several of her rulings, highlighting just how precarious her political standing had become. To make matters worse, the ongoing eviction case highlighted Henyard's questionable actions, including allegedly changing the garage door code and locks to prevent her landlord from entering the property. These actions only deepened the public's mistrust of the mayor and further undermined her credibility at the same time. Henyard's public relations efforts to shift focus to giveaways and promotional events were met with growing skepticism. Many residents saw these initiatives as thinly veiled attempts to placate the public while distracting from more pressing issues. Critics of the mayor compared the timing of these promotional stunts to political propaganda tactics used by authoritarian regimes. In particular, local critics drew parallels between Henyard's self-promotion, including her many posters and billboards with slogans like "Keeping My Promises" and "Fighting for My Residents," and populist stunts used by leaders like Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Henyard's personal image and authority had become central to the public narrative surrounding the town, with her attempts to manipulate public perception only heightening the sense of outrage among residents. Giant billboards emblazoned with her image and slogans began to the town, further blurring the lines between public service and personal branding. Reports also emerged that Henyard had used police officers as personal bodyguards, an action that many felt was an unnecessary use of public resources for her own protection rather than for the benefit of the community. While some residents acknowledged the mayor's right to security detail, they were outraged by the apparent misuse of taxpayer dollars for what they saw as personal enrichment. The situation reached a tipping point when Henyard called the police on workers removing banners featuring her image and the title Super Mayor. This incident further solidified her image as a leader who was disconnected from the needs and concerns of her constituents. The town's frustration was palpable, with many residents questioning how much longer the situation could continue and whether Henyard's self-serving behavior was sustainable. Despite the growing controversy and public disapproval, Henyard remained resolute in her re-election campaign. She seemed undeterred by the mounting allegations and the public backlash. Some trustees, however, argued that her story was far from over. They claimed that Henyard was attempting to control the narrative and salvage her legacy in the face of mounting allegations. While accusations of corruption and power abuse continued to cast a shadow over her leadership, the mayor remained determined to portray herself as a capable leader who was fighting for the residents of Dalton for Henyard. Her re-election bid had become a high-stakes battle, one in which she sought not just to maintain her position, but to convince the town that she was the best option for its future. Her campaign, marked by boldness and ambition, represented her refusal to accept the consequences of the scandals that had marred her time in office. Yet, as the campaign unfolded, the divide in Dalton only grew deeper on one side, were those who continued to support Henyard, viewing her as a strong, unapologetic leader who stood firm in the face of criticism. To them, she was a visionary leader persevering through relentless political sabotage. These supporters believed that her re-election represented a chance to continue the work she had started, with a focus on what they saw as the greater good of the community. On the other side were those calling for a fresh start, one that prioritized transparency, accountability, and a break from the abuse of power that had defined Henyard's tenure. Her opponents viewed her re-election bid as a desperate last-ditch attempt to hold on to power, dismissing the legitimate complaints of residents and critics who saw her leadership as a detriment to the town's well-being. Many felt that Henyard had squandered the trust of the community, and that it was time for a new direction, one that restored faith in local governance. As the election drew closer, a growing number of Dalton residents began to believe that a new beginning was necessary, one that would allow the community to move forward without the shadow of corruption hanging over it. Henyard's refusal to back down and her unwavering determination to push forward with her campaign framed her as a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. She cast her re-election bid as a crusade against the systemic barriers and political sabotage she claimed had been thrown her way. However, the community's frustration with her leadership had reached a breaking point. The intense political climate and drama surrounding her campaign had ignited a level of public discontent that could no longer be ignored. The stakes had never been higher, and the eyes of not just Dalton, but the entire state were now focused on the election. Henyard's re-election campaign had evolved into a larger conversation about the morality of leadership, the ethics of governance, and public responsibility. As Dalton residents grapple with years of frustration, unfulfilled promises, and a lack of accountability, the election was shaping up to be a pivotal moment in the town's history. It wasn't just a contest of the mayor's office. It was a test of the town's future course. Would Henyard manage to weather the storm of scandals and secure a second term, or would the election serve as a resounding verdict against her leadership and a call for change? This election had become more than just a political contest. It was a referendum on Henyard's leadership, on her handling of the controversies and scandals, and on the very future of Dalton itself. The outcome would determine whether the town was ready to continue under her leadership or whether it was time for a new era, one that prioritized accountability, transparency, and ethical governance. As the race intensified, the political and public discourse surrounding Henyard's candidacy only grew more charged. Her defiant ambition, unchecked by responsibility, had become a focal point for both her supporters and critics. The outcome of this election would undoubtedly shape the town's political landscape for years to come. Whether Henyard would emerge victorious, or whether this election would mark the end of her controversial rule, would be a defining moment in Dalton's history as the town continued to grapple with the growing frustrations of its residents. Henyard's re-election campaign stood as a testament to her boldness, her ambition, and her refusal to accept the consequences of her actions. But whether the town could continue under her leadership, or whether it would demand a new direction, remained to be seen.